The slap echoed louder than it should have in a crowded cafe, not because it was violent, but because the man who received it never raised his voice, never stepped back, and never looked angry. He simply stood there holding a paper bag with a grilled cheese sandwich and an apple mint for his daughter's school lunch, while a room full of strangers decided exactly who he was. No one noticed the scar near his collar. No one noticed the way his eyes instantly scanned every exit, every table, every possible risk before settling into calm again. And no one, not the CEO who had just humiliated him, nor the customers staring over their coffee cups, had any idea what kind of man they were looking at. Ethan Walker had been awake since 4:45 that morning. The fluorescent lights inside Miller's auto service hummed softly as he finished replacing a transmission before sunrise. His old pickup truck sat outside beneath a fading American flag that fluttered above the repair shop. Every extra hour mattered. The utility bill waiting on his kitchen counter was overdue, and his daughter Lily needed money for a school science trip next month. Ethan never complained about either. He simply worked. At 7:20 a.m., he checked his watch, washed the grease from his hands, and headed toward downtown Fairview. The school hallway would be crowded soon, and he had promised Lily he would bring her favorite lunch before her field trip meeting. Promises mattered, especially after the kind of loss that leaves an empty chair at the dinner table. The cafe sat across from the courthouse square, a place filled with attorneys, executives, and people carrying expensive laptops. Ethan stepped inside wearing worn work boots and a clean but faded denim jacket. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the room. Behind him, a television mounted above the counter quietly played a business news segment featuring Charlotte Hayes, CEO of Hayes Global Technologies, one of the fastest-growing companies in the Midwest. Ethan didn't pay attention. He ordered Lily's sandwich, checked the time again, and moved aside. That was when everything started to go wrong. A leather portfolio slipped from a nearby table. Papers scattered across the floor. Ethan instinctively bent down to help gather them. The woman standing beside the table turned sharply. Charlotte Hayes, the same CEO from the television screen. Her expression hardened immediately. "Don't touch those." The room grew quieter. Ethan froze and carefully lifted his hands away. "Ma'am," they were blowing across the floor. "I said don't touch them." Several customers looked over. Ethan nodded once. Understood. He stepped back. Most people would have argued. Most people would have defended themselves. Ethan simply respected the boundary and returned to waiting for Lily's order. But Charlotte was already having the worst morning of her year. A major acquisition meeting was scheduled in less than an hour. Sensitive documents had gone missing the previous night. Investors were pressuring her. Her security team was on edge. And when she glanced toward Ethan's work clothes and saw him near her scattered papers, she reached a conclusion before she reached the truth. Murmurs spread through the cafe. A man in a suit shook his head. Someone whispered that security should probably check him. Ethan heard every word. He ignored every word. The cashier finally handed over the paper bag. Ethan thanked her politely and turned toward the door. On his way out, his phone vibrated. A message from Lily's school flashed across the screen. Emergency parent meeting. Attendance strongly recommended. Ethan frowned. Missing work meant losing money he couldn't afford to lose. Missing the meeting wasn't an option either. Responsibility rarely offered convenient choices. As he slipped the phone back into his pocket, a reflection in the cafe window caught his attention. Not a person, a detail. A black SUV parked across the street. Engine running. Driver watching the building. For a brief second, Ethan's posture changed. Subtle, almost invisible, like someone recognizing a pattern other people missed. Then it was gone. He walked toward the entrance with quiet composure. Behind him, Charlotte Hayes watched the mechanic leave and felt a strange irritation she couldn't explain. Something about him didn't fit the picture she had already created in her mind. And across the room, one member of her security detail had just noticed a faded scar disappearing beneath Ethan Walker's collar, and suddenly forgotten how to breathe. The security detail did not move for several seconds after Ethan Walker left the cafe. His name was Marcus Reed, a former Army Ranger who had spent nearly a decade protecting executives, politicians, and people whose wealth attracted problems. He watched the mechanic cross the street, carrying a paper lunch bag, as if it contained something more valuable than the briefcase sitting beside Charlotte Hayes. Because to Ethan, it probably did. Marcus could not stop thinking about the scar. He had seen scars before. Thousands of them. But not that one. Not in that location. Not with that shape. Charlotte snapped her portfolio shut. "We are leaving." Marcus followed without comment. Yet as he climbed into the SUV, he glanced once more toward Ethan's old pickup truck parked near a hardware store. A question had planted itself in his mind, and it refused to leave. Across town, Ethan arrived at Fairview Elementary just as students poured through the school hallway, carrying backpacks and science projects. Lily spotted him immediately. Her face lit up. "You made it." Ethan handed her the lunch bag. "I said I would." The relief in her smile made the lost work hours worth it. It always did. Inside the school library, folding chairs had been arranged for parents. The principal explained that budget cuts threatened several student programs, including the science trip Lily had been looking forward to for months. Parents exchanged frustrated looks. Some complained. Others quietly checked their phones. Ethan listened carefully. When the meeting ended, he stayed behind. While several parents headed toward the parking lot, he volunteered to repair broken display cabinets and shelving units the school had been unable to afford replacing. He never mentioned that it meant giving up another evening of paid work. Responsibility often looked invisible from the outside. By noon, Ethan was back at Miller's Auto Service. The mailbox near the office door held another overdue utility notice. He folded it and slipped it into his pocket before anyone else could see it. Then he spent the afternoon diagnosing an electrical problem that had baffled another mechanic for 2 days. He worked quietly, tracing wires, testing voltage, noticing details others overlooked. Within 30 minutes, the truck started perfectly. His co-workers exchanged surprised glances. Ethan simply returned his tools. No celebración. No explanación. Just competence. Later, as the sun dropped behind the grain elevator on the edge of town, Ethan stopped at a grocery store to buy milk, bread, and Lily's favorite tomato soup. He carefully calculated every dollar before reaching the register. Nearby, an elderly woman struggled to load heavy bags into her trunk. Ethan set down his own groceries and helped without being asked. The woman thanked him repeatedly. He only smiled and wished her a good evening. Small acts of kindness had become a habit long ago. That night, after dinner, Ethan sat at the kitchen table reviewing Lily's science project while unpaid bills rested beneath a refrigerator magnet. The house was quiet except for the ticking wall clock. Then his phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Ethan answered. Silence. Then a man's voice. "Mr. Walker, I apologize for calling unexpectedly. My name is Marcus Reed. We met today, though you probably do not remember me." Ethan's expression remained calm. "How can I help you?" Another pause followed. Longer this time. Almost cautious. "I noticed a scar on your neck this morning. There is something I need to ask you about it." Ethan's eyes drifted toward the dark window above the kitchen sink. For the first time all day, something unreadable crossed his face. And hundreds of yards away, Marcus Reed sat inside his parked SUV, wondering whether he had just made the most important phone call of his life. The kitchen remained quiet for several seconds after Marcus Reed asked his question. Outside the window, the porch light cast a pale glow across Ethan Walker's small backyard, where Lily's bicycle leaned against a weathered fence. Inside, unpaid utility bills sat beneath a refrigerator magnet shaped like the state of Kansas. Ethan looked at them for a moment before answering. "It is an old scar." Marcus exhaled slowly. "I know." Ethan waited. The bodyguard seemed to choose his next words carefully. "The last time I saw one like it was in a military after-action briefing nearly 12 years ago." Silence settled again. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with things neither man was ready to say. Finally, Ethan replied, "That was a long time ago." "Yes, sir," Marcus said quietly. "It was." When the call ended, Ethan returned to helping Lily finish her science project. He never mentioned the conversation. Lily was focused on building a model wind turbine from cardboard and wooden sticks. Ethan adjusted one blade by less than half an inch, then showed her how balance affected efficiency. The model immediately spun smoother beneath a small desk fan. Lily smiled. How do you always know things like that? Ethan shrugged. Sometimes paying attention matters more than being smart. The next morning began before sunrise. Ethan dropped Lily off at school and headed toward the church parking lot, where volunteers were preparing for a weekend community fundraiser. Several folding tables had collapsed overnight after a storm. Without being asked, Ethan grabbed a toolbox from his pickup truck and started repairing them. By 8 o'clock, everything was standing straight again. He quietly left before anyone could thank him properly. Across town, Charlotte Hayes was having another difficult day. The missing documents from her acquisition deal still had not been recovered. Investors were demanding answers. Reporters were asking questions. Worse, Marcus had spent most of breakfast distracted. Finally, Charlotte set down her coffee. You have been acting strange since yesterday. Marcus hesitated. I may have been wrong about someone. Charlotte immediately knew who he meant. The mechanic from the cafe. The man with the lunch bag? Marcus nodded. There is more to him than we thought. Charlotte frowned. Based on what? Marcus looked out the conference room window. Instinct. She almost laughed. Marcus never relied on instinct. He relied on evidence. The fact that he seemed unsettled bothered her more than she expected. Later that afternoon, Charlotte left a strategy meeting early and stopped at a small diner outside downtown Fairview. She wanted 15 quiet minutes away from executives and spreadsheets. The place smelled like coffee and grilled onions. Country music played softly from an old jukebox near the counter. Then she saw him. Ethan sat alone in a booth reviewing papers while eating a bowl of soup. Not legal documents. School forms. Science trip forms. Budget worksheets. A father trying to make numbers work. Charlotte almost turned around. Instead, she ordered coffee and sat near the window. She told herself it was coincidence. Yet her attention kept drifting toward him. An elderly waitress accidentally dropped a tray near the kitchen entrance. Before anyone reacted, Ethan was already helping gather scattered dishes and checking whether she was hurt. No performance. No audience. No expectation of reward. Just instinctive kindness. The waitress squeezed his shoulder gratefully. Ethan returned to his booth as if nothing important had happened. For the first time, Charlotte felt something unfamiliar replacing her certainty. Doubt. Not about him. About herself. Then Ethan's phone rang. He listened for several seconds. The calm left his face. Not completely. Just enough for someone paying attention to notice. He stood immediately, gathered his papers, and headed for the door. And moments later, Charlotte found herself watching his pickup truck speed toward Fairview Memorial Hospital, wondering what kind of man remained so steady until someone else needed him. The emergency call had come from Fairview Elementary. Lily had collapsed during an after-school science demonstration. By the time Ethan's pickup truck pulled into Fairview Memorial Hospital, the evening sky had turned the color of cold steel. He moved quickly through the sliding doors, but there was no panic in him. No shouting. No demands. Just focus. The hospital waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. Nurses moved between stations. Families sat beneath muted television screens. Ethan reached the front desk, gave Lily's name, and listened carefully as staff explained that she was stable and undergoing routine tests. Most parents would have flooded the room with questions. Ethan asked only the right ones. The nurse noticed immediately. His calm helped everyone around him remain calm. 20 minutes later, Charlotte Hayes stepped through the same hospital entrance. She had not planned to follow him. She barely understood why she was there. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps the uncomfortable realization that the mechanic she had judged so quickly continued behaving like a man who had nothing to prove. She spotted him near a vending machine, speaking softly with an elderly couple who looked frightened and exhausted. Their grandson had been admitted unexpectedly. Ethan had bought them coffee using the last few dollars from his wallet. He never mentioned it. He simply handed over the cups and wished them well. Charlotte watched from across the hallway. The image did not fit the version of him she had created inside her mind. Yet before she could reconsider anything, a new problem emerged. A hospital administrator hurried into the waiting room, carrying a clipboard. A critical equipment failure had disrupted part of the building's backup electrical system. Maintenance crews were delayed because of storm damage on a nearby highway. Staff members scrambled between departments. Frustration spread quickly. Ethan listened for less than a minute before quietly walking over. Which circuit panel is affected? The administrator looked annoyed. Sir, hospital personnel are handling it. Ethan nodded politely and stepped back. Dismissed. Judged. Ignored. Again. Charlotte noticed the exchange. So did Marcus Reed, who had arrived after receiving a text from her driver. 10 minutes later, the situation worsened. Several systems remained offline. Nurses rushed between stations carrying updates. Finally, the administrator reluctantly asked whether anyone in the room had technical experience. Ethan stood. No drama. No speeches. I work on electrical systems. Skepticism immediately crossed the man's face. The denim jacket. The work boots. The mechanic. Yet there were no better options. Ethan followed him through a secured corridor. Charlotte remained seated, but her attention never left the door. 30 minutes passed, then 40. Finally, a maintenance supervisor emerged, looking genuinely stunned. Who was that guy? He asked nobody in particular. He identified the fault in less than 5 minutes. Another employee shook his head, said the issue was not where everyone was looking. He was right. Charlotte felt something shift inside her. Not certainty, not trust, but respect. Small and reluctant, yet impossible to ignore. When Ethan finally returned, he did not mention what he had done. He went straight back to Lily's room. Marcus watched him carefully. The same scar, the same composure, the same refusal to seek recognition. Pieces were beginning to connect, but the picture remained incomplete. An hour later, a doctor entered Lily's room with test results. Ethan stood immediately. The doctor's expression was serious enough to drain the warmth from the room. And as Ethan listened, even his remarkable calm seemed to grow heavier, because what the doctor said next threatened something far more important than hospital repair or an overdue utility bill. The doctor closed the chart and pulled a chair closer to Ethan. The hospital room felt smaller suddenly. Machines hummed softly. Rain tapped against the window, overlooking the parking lot, where Ethan's aging pickup truck sat beneath a flickering street lamp. Lily rested quietly in bed, exhausted but stable. Your daughter is going to be okay, the doctor said first. Ethan's shoulders eased slightly. Then came a difficult part. The test suggested a rare cardiac condition that required additional evaluation from specialists in Kansas City. Treatment was possible. The prognosis was hopeful, but it would be expensive, time-consuming, and require frequent travel. Ethan listened without interrupting. He took notes on the back of an old utility bill envelope he had pulled from his jacket pocket. Questions came one at a time. Clear, practical, focused entirely on Lily's future. The doctor noticed immediately. This was not a man searching for someone to blame. This was a father preparing for responsibility. Outside the room, Charlotte sat alone in the hospital waiting area. The same waiting area where families stared at vending machines and half-finished cups of coffee while hoping for good news. Marcus stood nearby. Finally, he handed her a thin folder. I did not want to investigate him, Marcus admitted. But after seeing that scar, I needed answers. Charlotte opened the folder. The first page stopped her cold. Ethan Walker, former Army Corps infrastructure specialist. Decorated for leadership during a catastrophic flood response operation 12 years earlier. Multiple civilian lives saved. Commendations from federal emergency agencies. Advanced engineering certifications. Specialized training in critical systems recovery. Charlotte turned another page. Then another. The mechanic who fixed transmissions. The father carrying school lunch bags. The man she had dismissed in a cafe. He had once coordinated emergency repairs that kept entire communities functioning after disaster struck. Marcus lowered his voice. The hospital equipment problem tonight was probably simple for him. Charlotte stared at the file. Why would someone with this background be working in a small auto shop? Marcus looked toward Lily's room. Maybe because life happened. For several moments, neither spoke. Across the hallway, Ethan emerged from the room carrying a stack of forms. Charlotte stood instinctively. He noticed her, but showed no sign of resentment. No anger, no bitterness, the same quiet dignity. "How is your daughter?" she asked. Ethan glanced back toward the room. "She is brave." Charlotte expected him to say more. He did not. Then she noticed something else. The hospital billing coordinator approaching him with concern written across her face. Insurance complications, specialist referrals, additional paperwork, obstacles piling up faster than solutions. Ethan thanked the coordinator for her time and began sorting through documents himself. Not complaining, not demanding exceptions, just working through the problem. Charlotte watched him for nearly a minute before stepping forward. "I have connections with several medical networks," she said carefully. "If you need help navigating the process, I can make a few calls." Ethan looked at her, the woman who had judged him, the woman beginning to see him differently. His response was gentle. "Thank you. Let me try to handle what I can first." There was no pride in the answer, only responsibility. Somehow that affected Charlotte more than gratitude would have. As Ethan returned to Lily's room, a nurse hurried down the corridor carrying an envelope that had just arrived from the administrative office. She stopped at the doorway. "Mr. Walker?" Ethan turned. "There is an issue with your insurance authorization." The nurse's expression tightened. A serious one. And for the first time since the diagnosis, a new threat appeared. One that could put Lily's treatment at risk before it even began. The nurse led Ethan into a small administrative office tucked behind the hospital waiting room. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A stack of insurance forms sat beside a printer that seemed older than some of the staff. The problem was simple to explain and devastating to hear. A clerical error years earlier had triggered a dispute between two insurance providers. Until it was resolved, approval for Lily's specialist evaluations could be delayed for weeks. Weeks it did not have. The administrator apologized repeatedly. Ethan never blamed her. He listened, took notes, and asked for every document connected to the case. By the time he walked back into the hallway, he carried a folder nearly 2 inches thick. Charlotte was still there. Most executives would have returned to their offices hours ago. Instead, she found herself watching the father she had once dismissed sort through paperwork with the same concentration he had used repairing the hospital's electrical system. "Can I help?" she asked. Ethan glanced up. "Do you know anything about insurance appeals?" Charlotte almost smiled. "I run a corporation with 12,000 employees." "Unfortunately, yes." For the first time, they sat at the same table instead of standing on opposite sides of a misunderstanding. Together, they reviewed forms in a corner of the hospital waiting room, while families moved quietly between vending machines and elevators. Within minutes, Charlotte noticed something surprising. Ethan understood complex systems remarkably well. He identified inconsistencies buried deep inside the paperwork. He spotted procedural errors that even experienced administrators had overlooked. More than once, Charlotte found herself pausing simply to watch him think. "You have done this before," she said. Ethan shook his head. "Not insurance." "Then how are you finding these issues?" He considered the question. Most systems fail the same way. People stop looking at the connections. The answer stayed with her. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove his pickup truck across town, gathering records from clinics, insurance offices, and county agencies. The process should have taken days. Somehow he organized it in hours. Not because he had influence, because he knew how to ask the right questions and speak respectfully to the right people. At one office, he noticed a frustrated elderly veteran struggling to understand benefits paperwork. Ethan spent 20 minutes helping him complete the forms before continuing his own search. Every delay made his situation harder. He helped anyway. By evening, a breakthrough arrived. Ethan discovered that the original error traced back to an incorrectly coded emergency treatment record from years earlier. Hospital administrators were stunned. The issue had survived multiple audits. Yet somehow the mechanic from Fairview had uncovered it in a single day. Word spread quietly through the building. People began asking who he really was. Charlotte already knew part of the answer, but only part. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Charlotte found Marcus sitting in the hospital cafeteria, drinking stale coffee. "You were right," she admitted. Marcus nodded. "About what?" Charlotte looked through the cafeteria window toward Ethan's pickup parked beneath a streetlight. There is more to him than we thought. Marcus remained silent for a moment. Then he pulled another document from his folder. Actually, there is something else you should see. Charlotte accepted the paper. Her eyes moved across the page, then widened. It was not another military commendation. It was something far more surprising. Something Ethan had never mentioned to anyone. And if the document was authentic, it meant the man fighting to protect his daughter had walked away from an opportunity that could have changed the entire course of his life. Charlotte read the document twice before looking up. Then she read it a third time. The paper had been issued nearly 9 years earlier by a respected engineering firm outside Denver. Ethan Walker had been offered a senior systems design position with a salary that would have changed everything. The compensation package alone was more money than he would earn in several years at Miller's Auto Service. The promotion track was extraordinary. The opportunity had been real. And according to the final note attached to the file, Ethan had declined it voluntarily. Charlotte stared at the page. Why would anyone walk away from this? Marcus leaned back in his cafeteria chair. The offer came 3 months after his wife became seriously ill. The answer landed heavily between them. Across the hospital hallway, Ethan sat beside Lily's bed, helping her with math homework from school. The room was quiet except for the occasional beep of monitoring equipment. He explained fractions using packets of crackers from the hospital cafeteria because it made more sense to a 10-year-old than numbers on a worksheet. Lily laughed when he intentionally got one answer wrong. For a moment, the weight of medical bills, insurance disputes, and uncertainty disappeared. Charlotte watched from the doorway. The more she learned about him, the less she understood how she had misjudged him so completely. The next morning, Ethan stopped by his small house before returning to the hospital. A stack of mail waited inside the mailbox near the curb. Utility notices, insurance letters, school forms, ordinary pressures of ordinary life. Yet before heading back, he noticed a neighbor struggling to start an aging sedan. Ethan spent 30 minutes fixing a corroded battery connection, even though he was already late. He refused payment. By the time he returned to Fairview Memorial, several hospital employees greeted him by name. Word of the insurance breakthrough and electrical repair had spread quietly. People who once saw only a mechanic now saw something else. Competence, reliability, character. But recognition remained incomplete because Ethan himself never encouraged it. That afternoon, Charlotte finally asked him directly. They sat in a small family lounge overlooking the hospital parking lot where rain collected in shallow puddles around his pickup truck. "You turned down a major engineering career," she said carefully. Ethan looked surprised. Not angry, just surprised that anyone knew. It was not the right time. Charlotte shook her head. Most people would have taken it. Ethan considered the statement. Maybe, and you did not. His gaze drifted toward Lily's room. My wife needed me. Then my daughter needed me. Some decisions are easier than they look. Charlotte had spent years around ambitious people. Executives who sacrificed marriages, friendships, and health for advancement. For the first time, she was sitting across from someone who had willingly chosen responsibility over prestige. The realization unsettled her in the best possible way. Yet even as respect grew, another problem arrived. Near sunset, Ethan received a call from Miller's Auto Service. Business had slowed unexpectedly. The owner sounded apologetic. Several positions might be cut temporarily, including Ethan's. When the call ended, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and said nothing. But Charlotte saw the change immediately. Not panic, not fear, calculation. A father silently measuring risk. Medical travel, specialist appointments, insurance battles, and now the possibility of losing the income that kept everything afloat. For the first time since this journey began, Ethan was facing a threat he could not solve with knowledge, discipline, or hard work alone. And as darkness settled outside the hospital windows, a certified letter arrived from the insurance company containing a decision that could determine whether Lily received treatment at all. The certified letter arrived just before 9 o'clock. The envelope looked ordinary enough resting on a plastic chair in the hospital waiting room. But when Ethan opened it, the words inside carried the weight of a closing door. The insurance appeal had been denied. Further review could take months. Coverage for Lily's specialist treatment would not move forward under the current authorization. Around them, televisions continued broadcasting weather reports. Nurses pushed carts down quiet hallways. Life continued as if nothing had changed. Yet for Ethan, everything suddenly felt farther away. Kansas City, the specialists, the answers Lily needed. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. No anger, no scene, just a father absorbing another burden. Charlotte watched from across the room. The change in him was subtle, but it was there. For the first time since she had known him, his shoulders looked tired. Not defeated, just tired. The next morning brought more bad news. Miller's auto service confirmed temporary layoffs. Ethan's position was among those being suspended until business improved. The owner sounded genuinely apologetic. Ethan thanked him anyway. After the call ended, he sat alone inside his pickup truck parked beneath a maple tree near the hospital entrance. Rain dotted the windshield. Utility bills waited inside his glove compartment. Medical forms covered the passenger seat. For several minutes, he simply sat there. Then his phone buzzed. It was Lily. She wanted help with another math assignment. Ethan immediately smiled, stepped out of the truck, and headed back inside. Responsibility came first. It always had. By afternoon, another complication emerged. A hospital social worker explained that without specialist approval, certain school activities and travel recommendations might be restricted until Lily's condition was fully evaluated. Ethan listened carefully. Lily listened too. The brave smile she had carried for days finally cracked. "Does that mean I cannot go on the science trip?" she asked quietly. The room fell silent. Ethan looked at his daughter. This was what hurt most. Not the paperwork, not the job loss, not the uncertainty. Watching a child begin to fear that her future was shrinking. "We are not giving up," he told her gently. "Not on this. Not on anything." That evening, Charlotte found him in the hospital cafeteria, helping another family understand insurance forms while his own appeal sat unresolved. The sight affected her more deeply than she expected. Even now, even here, Ethan spent his energy helping others. Yet outside observers still misunderstood him. One administrator, unaware of his background, quietly suggested that Ethan should stop trying to manage complex paperwork himself and leave it to professionals. Another implied that his persistence was slowing the process. Charlotte saw the comments land. Ethan remained respectful. He thanked them and continued gathering information. But the injustice of it settled heavily on her. The man who had solved problems others missed. The man who had sacrificed opportunity for family. The man who had spent days protecting his daughter while helping strangers. Still being underestimated. Still being dismissed. Late that night, Charlotte returned to her office for the first time in days. Marcus joined her carrying several folders. Together they reviewed everything they had learned. The engineering records, the military commendations, the insurance findings. Then Marcus discovered something neither of them had seen before. Buried inside an old federal archive was a report connected to the flood response operation from 12 years earlier. A report containing names, testimony, and details that had never been publicly discussed. Marcus looked up slowly. Charlotte read the first page, then the second. Her eyes widened, because the full truth about Ethan Walker was finally there. And when it came to light, it would change far more than an insurance decision. The report remained open on Charlotte Hayes' desk long after midnight. Outside her office windows, downtown Fairview glowed beneath scattered streetlights and passing headlights. Marcus stood beside her in silence while she finished reading the final pages. 12 years earlier, during one of the worst flood emergencies in the region's history, a critical infrastructure failure had threatened an entire county. Communications were collapsing. Evacuation routes were disappearing. Emergency teams were losing contact with one another. According to the archive testimony, a young systems specialist named Ethan Walker had identified a solution no one else could see. More importantly, when federal officials later offered him recognition, promotions, and opportunities, he redirected attention toward the local crews, volunteers, and first responders who had worked beside him. He had refused interviews, refused publicity, refused personal credit. The report contained dozens of statements praising his leadership. Yet the most striking sentence appeared near the end. Ethan Walker consistently prioritized people over recognition, even at personal cost. Charlotte slowly lowered the file. Suddenly, every piece fit together. The hospital repair, the insurance discovery, the engineering offer he declined, the way he treated strangers in diners, neighbors in parking lots, nurses in hallways, and his daughter in hospital rooms. None of it was an act. It was character. Early the next morning, Charlotte arrived at Fairview Memorial before sunrise. The hospital waiting room was nearly empty except for a few families sleeping in chairs and a volunteer refilling a coffee station. Ethan sat alone reviewing paperwork beneath a fluorescent light. Utility bills, specialist referrals, insurance appeals, and school forms covered the table. He looked exhausted. Charlotte approached quietly. "I think we found something." Ethan glanced up. "About the insurance?" "About you." For a moment, he seemed almost uncomfortable. Marcus handed him a copy of the report. Ethan looked at the cover and immediately understood. "Where did you find this?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Federal Archives." Ethan sighed softly. Not annoyed, just resigned. "That was a long time ago." Charlotte pulled out a chair. "Maybe, but explains a lot." Before Ethan could respond, the hospital administrator entered the waiting room carrying several folders. Behind him came two insurance representatives who had reviewed the appeal overnight after receiving documentation connected to Ethan's findings. They requested a meeting immediately. Ethan followed them into a conference room overlooking the hospital parking lot where his pickup truck sat beneath the morning sun. What happened next took less than 30 minutes. The coding error he had uncovered, the supporting documentation he had organized, the procedural inconsistencies he had identified. Together, they created an undeniable case. The denial was overturned. Specialist evaluations were approved. Coverage was authorized. Lily's treatment path could finally move forward. Relief swept through Ethan's face, though he remained characteristically calm. But the emotional moment came afterward. As the meeting ended, one insurance representative asked a simple question. "Mr. Walker, what exactly did you do before becoming a mechanic?" Ethan hesitated. He clearly preferred not to answer. Before he could speak, the hospital administrator lifted the federal report from the table. Several people began reading portions aloud. The room grew quieter with every sentence. Commendations. Emergency response leadership. Engineering expertise. Sacrifice career opportunities. Years spent choosing family over advancement. No one interrupted. No one looked away. The room went silent. Not because of titles. Not because of status. Because everyone suddenly understood that the man they had underestimated had been showing them who he was all along. Through responsibility. Through kindness. Through competence. Through quiet dignity. Later that week, Lily returned home. Neighbors placed welcome cards in the mailbox. Volunteers from the church parking lot fundraiser stopped by with meals. Co-workers from Miller's Auto Service organized temporary work until business improved. Not out of pity, out of respect. One afternoon, Ethan and Lily sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint gold across their neighborhood. Lily leaned against his shoulder. "Dad, yeah. Are you a hero?" Ethan smiled and looked toward the street where children rode bicycles beneath the evening sky. "No, sweetheart." She frowned. "Then why does everyone keep thanking you?" Ethan thought about the question for a moment. Then he answered the only way he knew how. Because sometimes people are having a hard day. And when you help them, they remember. Lily nodded as if that made perfect sense. Maybe it did. Across town, Charlotte Hayes stood outside a small diner, holding a cup of coffee. She watched Ethan's pickup truck pass through an intersection and disappear toward home. The memory of that first terrible misunderstanding still embarrassed her. Yet what remained stronger was gratitude. Gratitude that she had been given the chance to see the truth before it was too late. Because some people announce their worth the moment they enter a room, and some people carry it quietly through every choice they make. Ethan Walker had never demanded respect. He had earned it. And in the end, that was why the room fell silent.